Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, Solving the Data Disconnect. We've got a really great discussion in store for you guys about the importance of interoperability, connected data, how folks have traditionally struggled a little bit to bring together data sets from different external providers, our approach to that, and the value that we see that delivering for all sorts of organizations. Before I introduce our speakers and pass it over to them, I want to really briefly run through some housekeeping items. You'll see that below the main presentation window, there's an assortment of resources that we'd love for you to peruse at some point after the webinar. We think they're really helpful and interesting links down there. And then over on the left-hand side of your screen, there's also a chat function. So if you have any sort of questions or any burning inquiries that come up as you're listening to our presenters discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please drop those questions in that chat and we'll get to them at time we've got reserved towards the end of the discussion. So I'd love to hear from you there. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers for today's discussion. From Precisely, we have Dan Adams, Executive Vice President and GM of Enrich, our data business here at Precisely. And joining him is Drew Brunig from Overture Maps Foundation, GERS Evangelist. And I'm actually going to pass it directly over to Drew to get us into these topics, get us into this discussion, and maybe tell us a little bit more about Overture as well. So, Drew, over to you.
Thanks. Morning, everyone. Where it is still morning, though, in the Bay Area of California, it's still morning for me, just barely. I hope everybody's doing well today, and excited to be here to talk about my favorite topic, which is data connectivity and interoperability and making it easier. But first, let me give you a quick overview of Overture Maps. Hopefully you've heard of us by now. We've been around since 2022. We are an open geospatial data project. We were founded by Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and TomTom to create reliable, interoperable, easy to use, and accessible open map data. So we release now 6 different map layers corresponding with addresses, places, transportation, base, buildings, and more, compiled together from either open data sets or data sets contributed by our members. We run complex data pipelines to prepare those for you and make sure they're easy to use. And then we stage them in cloud native formats of GeoParquet on your favorite cloud providers, both AWS and Azure, as you can expect, though additional distributions are maintained by Carto on a host of platforms, including Databricks, Snowflake, GCP, and more. It's an incredible project. We've got nearly 40 members. I consider myself privileged to get to work with these guys. We sit within the Linux Foundation, and we build for companies building geospatial products, developers needing custom map data, and data providers for a shared ecosystem. Because our goal is to make the geospatial marketplace bigger. We're at this really interesting moment for geospatial, where we kind of have these are kind of geospatial specialist pipelines are coming into contact with geospatial features that have been invented by data generalist software and pipelines. So you're starting to see these kind of two things come into contact and kind of figure out and negotiate what it means to work with geospatial data. And we want to kind of sit at the middle of those two things, providing data that everyone can use and leverage and be a common foundation and framework. Now, besides making the geospatial market bigger by making geospatial data available and easy to access, there's another problem that we want to spend some time on and that we care a lot about because we see it as a hindrance that blocks the adoption of geospatial data. The first is that we've observed that data costs more to onboard than it does to license. Data onboarding is just this hidden tax on the data ecosystem. If you're going out there and you're working on a project and you say, hey, what would help us here is if we knew the opening and closing hours for these stores. Or what would help us here is if we knew kind of the star ratings for all the pizzerias or whatever it may be. Just the task of going out there, searching for a couple candidates, running them through evals, putting them through procurement and legal, purchasing them, testing the data, onboarding the data, you're looking at months to even longer than a year to get that data into your ecosystem staged in a place where you can actually use it. And so we're working hard to make that data onboarding easier by creating interoperable foundations that allow data to be joined as simply as performing a column join, not a complex geospatial conflation pipeline. And that leads to the second point, which is that for most companies, geospatial data is just too hard to handle for most data teams. Even the word conflation may not be known by all of you. It's the task of kind of taking two geospatial data sets and merging them together into one data set, negotiating, which data points point to the same real world entities and all of these other complex paths. That's hard to do. And even for geospatial experts, you can't really do it perfectly. You can just do it as best as you can. And while most organizations can benefit from geospatial intelligence, they don't because these barriers are too high. We want to make this stuff as easy as a column join. And as a result of these two kind of problems, they have some symptoms that have knock-on effects on your business or your organization. You end up with slower innovation because you have to spend too much time and resources getting data into your environment, which is time spent not building valuable solutions. You end up having persistent blind spots because you just decide, hey, getting this data in is going to be more trouble than it's worth. So I'm just not going to do it. And I see that all the time. And so there's this kind of blind spot that persists. As a result, your products aren't as good because they have less perspective about the world and you can't integrate data that addresses a new user need. And then finally, when it comes to geospatial, you end up having these persistent, stubborn silos. I'm sure many of you either have observed or work in a company where the geospatial team and the data team are two completely different teams with different cultures, different resources, different technology stacks. And as a result, they just don't talk to each other. And as a result, those insights can't be shared between those two things. And all of this, compounds. Is as you start to work with multiple providers, it's not like once you get good at onboarding one data set, you can transfer that knowledge over to another data set. Unfortunately, data sets are like children. They're all kind of their own independent beasts. And, you learn a bunch during your first child, but then your second child, they're a completely new person, and which is frustrating for me as a father of two children, which is why it's the metaphor on the top of my mind. But this is a problem that we're dealing with, and we're excited to work with Precisely, who's been leveraging some of our technology to help address this problem. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan, who will take you through a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. A couple of things before I dig in, much more deeply about some things that are Precisely centric that I'd like to add to what Drew said. One is the challenges that Drew walked through are not a one-time challenge. It actually becomes more and more difficult if you intend to update the data for multiple providers over a period of time. Just as, I'm not a father, so I may kind of get weak in using your analogy, but it's sort of like you come up with a solution to solve an argument between your two children on one topic. That same solution may not work the next time. Things change. And that's true with data suppliers. Data suppliers are notorious for changing formats, changing release dates, kind of missing milestones, et cetera, on their roadmaps. So planning around one data provider is complicated. It's even more so if you're talking about multiple data suppliers. These, in the data ecosystem, there are very few standards. There are not standards between companies for record layouts, something as simple as address or places data. Those things are all different and unique, just as Drew said. And because these the data supply chain lacks that set of standards, there have been attempts in the past with other companies or other initiatives to create some sort of ID framework with the invitation for everybody to adopt that framework. And they haven't really taken off. So to solve that problem, what we have done at Precisely is launched a program that we're calling Data Link. And the intention of Data Link is to connect various data suppliers. Overture is one of them. By IDs that those data companies are already using. So just as Drew was talking about, turning onboarding data into something as simple as a column join, it's really the intent of the Data Link program for the data suppliers to work upstream from the users to resolve those ID to ID connections. And then, with the launch of this program, in addition to Overture, Precisely is bringing together Dun and Bradstreet with the Duns ID, GeoX with a shared building ID, and Regrid with a shared land parcel ID. And then, of course, Overture. And with Overture, we're starting with the Overture Places theme and connecting the Precisely IDs into the Overture Maps Places theme. One of the asks for the audience today is to give us feedback on your use of Overture data and the GERS system itself, whether that comes directly to Overture or Precisely. We work very closely together to share what we're hearing in the space. And as Drew said, I think very eloquently, what we're trying to do is facilitate the use of data, believing that the more useful data is, the more the data will be used, and there'll be a self-fulfilling cycle in reducing costs, kind of getting that return on investment. And then people will innovate. And when they innovate, the use cases will expand. And again, it creates a bit of a flywheel effect. So in terms of linking to Overture, I'm going to pass it over to Drew. Back to Drew, and we'll kind of go back and forth from here on out. So back over to you, Drew.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. So I mentioned before that Overture has themes. This is a play on the word overture, which took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out, even though I was working on this every day. Overtures have themes or motifs. So our themes are transportation, which is road networks and segments defined by 300 plus million connectors and segments. We've got places, which are points of interest, so businesses, restaurants, parks, anything you would want to search for, really. Divisions are administrative boundaries like cities, towns, counties, neighborhoods, states, and more. Buildings is an incredible data set that gets some of our most interest, especially among governments and NGOs. So we actually take we look at Esri OSM, Google and Microsoft ML buildings, and then even a couple new municipalities are starting to use this. I think in not this release, but the next release, the city of Vancouver will be donating buildings directly. We'll talk about that in a second. And all of this is conflated and joined so that we don't, you don't have to deal with all of these different sources. You just deal with one source and all the buildings are together. It's a really, really, really nice thing. The other really impressive source is addresses. So if you didn't know, Precisely has the best address database in the world, in my humble opinion. But in terms of open addresses, I don't think there's anything better than the Overture addresses team, team and layer. It's an incredible data set. And really, if you're just getting started and, it's a great data set to get started with, because it's friendly licensed, no ODBL, no share alike, and it's obtaining the addresses from the actual government and authoritative entities. Doesn't have complete coverage. You're not going to get, door point drop-offs and all those nice features, but it's a really, really great data set to get started with. And then finally, if you're building a map, if you want to put all these things on a map and you want to know where the land and water is, we have a base visualization that's really designed purely almost for map builders, but it has a lot of land, water data, and other things. Today, I believe Precisely is working directly with our Places data set, which is an incredible data set that leverages Microsoft's Places, Facebook business listings, and beyond. We just onboarded PinMe2 or Pin2Me, I can never forget what it is, which is a business listings aggregator and manager. So if you are, say, a French grocery store and you want to make sure that your listings are accurate throughout the entire ecosystems of MAP, you might work with PinMe2, and that's now distributed within Overture as well. Now, in addition to giving you data about what the world looks like, what's just as important is how we structure this data. So every data point in these layers, if a place, a neighborhood, a border, an address, a building, they all have a persistent ID, as persistent as we can make it, which we call our GERS ID. GERS is an acronym. It stands for Global Entity Reference System. And these IDs are designed to be persistent data points that once you match once with Overture, or once you leverage someone else's matching, like Precisely's data links matching, you can easily connect to that GERS ID, and you can share it with whoever else is using GERS IDs, and you can enrich other GERS organized data sources with your own data. So we're starting to see this evolve and begin the first baby steps towards becoming a community of like identified IDs. Now, why this is cool is because then once you have these IDs, you don't need to kind of do crazy map routines to connect to geospatial data sets. You can just do a column join on the GERS. And suddenly we move from being, just a reference map to being a reference framework, something that you can kind of agree that, hey, we're referring to the same place. And we know we're referring to the same place because the data is public and open, and we can go investigate that the place that we're referring to is the same. Unlike other ID systems, I believe this is one of the first ones that I think, has a good shot at working because the data itself is open. It's not a Hotel California situation where people get locked in and they can't leave. We want to work with all IDs that we can, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. So this interoperability, it's what we are ultimately working towards. It's our big goal, is that we become a common framework for structuring and mapping map data, making sharing data and onboarding data just incredibly easier. And you can enter the GERS ecosystem either by yourself, by downloading the data and matching your data to it, by adopting Overture, or you can work with any of our partners. We work with tons of people, including other Overture members like Esri, Precisely, TomTom, depending on what it is that you're going to be dealing with. And now you can start to link and append and enrich your geospatial data, whether it's a map or not, all of these additional enrichments. And bringing this to life in a practical example that you can use today is the data link product, because we link our GERS IDs with Precisely's unique IDs, or rather Precisely links our IDs because they're open, freely available, and they come into Precisely's environment and get linked to your platform. So, Dan?
Yeah, and just kind of adding to that, we at Precisely, and I'll say also, just personally from my experience, the best place to start is usually using data that is either open or from a government source, et cetera, that doesn't have licensing fees. And I would encourage and do encourage our customers to onboard data from any source that is reputable, has the license terms that work for your organization or use case, and use that as either a starting point. In this case, I know of a few startups that are using the Overture Maps data as a starting point to launch product. And the belief is that if we make the system work well, those applications are going to look for deeper context. And that's when, those startups will begin talking to Precisely about bringing in additional content or linking in more information or forming some other relationships that I'll show you on the next slide that you can do with Precisely data. Also, we have a number of very large enterprise customers who in financial services, insurance space, et cetera, that are going to use the Overture Maps Foundation data as an additional data set in their operations. Um, we could just kind of ignore that's happening, or we could work with Overture to make that process easier and better for our existing customers to onboard that data. We certainly elected the latter. Again, you'll hear the theme over and over. Connecting these data sets and making them easier to use, we believe, is going to facilitate the use of more data. So that's kind of why we continue to do this, and believing that if the two data companies are working well together, or in this case, a company and a foundation, what we're going to do is solve more of the problems, work through and iterate in the complexities, and be able to get more of those edge cases resolved. And that's going to result in better, more functional data over time without our shared users needing to reinvest money in something that we've already solved. So I'm pretty excited about the concept in sort of a macro sense, but also getting right down to the very individual use cases and data sets that we're talking about. And then, as I said, linking into these various Overture themes, coming back and the fact that the themes that Overture is managing are managed in a connected ecosystem, connecting into precisely data link then allows any one of those places. In the future, this will include Overture addressing data, building data, et cetera. You can get at the catalog of information that Precisely is managing, whether that is demographics, risk hazard information, tagging with a neighborhood name, getting at property attributes. If you're interested in the building and you want to know who owns it, getting at that type of information. And again, being able to traverse this network of data through ID connections. I don't have a graphic on this, but then imagine you're starting with Dun & Bradstreet, Dunn's number, and you want to get at the Overture hours of operations, or you want to get at the Facebook page, something along those lines. Being able to set a query that maps the graph and gets you from a Dunn's number to a very discrete set of information from Overture, you'll be able to traverse this network of linked IDs to do that. And again, I just think that's so cool. I mean, the fact that we're actually doing this in a way that isn't trying to lock any user into a specific ID system, but being able to actually leverage the power and potential of an ID system to get at the information that you need. And when I say that we're doing all of these things, this really is just the beginning of what it is that we envision, and sort of the cooperation that we have working with an entity like the Overture Maps Foundation that's really leading the way and sharing architectures and really providing a lot of thought leadership in the space for making IDs much more accessible and open. Drew, why don't you take us through this next one?
Yeah, I think this is a good example of we're coming in here, with, looking this one or this one?
That one right there.
All right, perfect. So one of the things that I love about this integration is that, say you are a company that is looking to boot up kind of geospatial, understanding of the world, and you really don't know where to get started, or you have some addresses or some other kind of hand curated data that you've kind of accrued from your customers and other things. It might seem hard to get started. You may go out and you may try Overture Places and say, all right, we're going to start with this. We're going to match our data to this. And now we can put all the places on the map, the ones we understand and the ones we don't understand. And that's a really great way to get started. But this comes back to the perspectives that I think that are really important, is that that data is really good, but it's kind of a foundational layer. It may tell you the name of the business. It may give you the social links for the business to Facebook. It may give you the phone numbers, but it doesn't give you kind of all of these other perspectives that you can have. Really, any data set can be pinned to a map. It's just kind of takes the effort to, go out and acquire the data and pin it to the map. And what I like about a lot of these precisely use cases is that we're just starting with either an address, and it can be a messy address, or it can be just an Overture GERS ID, which I've got these IDs and I want to know more about them. Well, rather than having to do a complex join or accept this data as a data drop in an FTP and then write all my pipelines or whatever everything else, it's just an API call where I'm passing that GERS identifier, and then I'm specifying what data I want back. I can get all of this, here's all my tornado risk, my wildfire risk, the number of addresses that are within the building, getting more information about this. It is just a great place to start and slowly broaden your perspective. I liken it to adding more lenses to your camera. You're just getting lots and lots of different angles on the original business listing, and you kind of pay for what the angles and perspectives that you want. You aren't paying for the onboarding. That's the big innovation, is that as you the metaphor I like to use, especially when managing or training data scientists, is as you go through an analysis, a data scientist is going to make hypotheses and then go test those hypotheses, make hypotheses, then go test those hypotheses. And they'll keep going until they kind of find kind of the thread that they can pull on where there's, stable ground. But at some point, they bump their head on the ceiling or against the wall. And that they're hitting the limits of what data they have, what perspective they have. They're asking a question that they cannot answer given the data they have, either because the data isn't granular enough, the great data isn't recent enough, or they just don't have that perspective. And what I love about this is if you bump your head, you don't have to call up procurement and say, I want to go out and to start an eval for this data. It's an API call away. And that has been game changing in what is the most important factor here, which is the speed of iteration. You can cycle through more hypotheses and discover quickly, hey, is this worth pursuing or not worth pursuing? And you save your time, you save your effort, and get that perspective on demand with essentially a single API call and a single column join.
That's great. Thanks, Drew. And, I think, just adding a bit there, you can also avoid purchasing data that you won't get the value from.
Yeah,
and I think that's fast. Yeah, it's really helpful. And I think that's something that is really important overall. Is just kind of being able to test, iterate, confirm whether something is going to add value to your operations, and then be able to get it in and onboard without having to go and not just do the checks for initiate the purchase process, but also figuring out how am I going to get the staff to do this work, and only to find out that it isn't adding value. So one of the shared users of or I'll say customers that Overture and Precisely has is DoorDash. And I've been in a number of conversations with DoorDash over the years, and just a couple of months ago attended a presentation that they gave at the Ellis conference. And in that presentation, they were talking about the importance of multi-sourcing suppliers and how they were using the Overture Maps Foundation architecture, the ID architecture, as the model for the system that they are building, to be able to ensure that when they are talking about a specific address or location, and they're looking at various data sources, that they are in fact talking about the same entity, the same location, and then pulling in information from the various sources to build what amounts to a golden record. And one of the things that they were talking about is in using that architecture and the system that they're building, that they're able to avoid vendor lock-in. That if for some reason they want to stop using a specific vendor or onboard a different vendor, they can do that in a very modular and dynamic way. So you may be thinking, well, gosh, that's the whole reason why all these other data companies don't open up their ID system, because they don't want to make it easy to offboard their data as part of a solution. And precisely, we have a bit of the opposite feeling, which is we need to earn your business. Um, and we're not going to earn your business by being too difficult for you to, kind of fire us. We want to earn your business by bringing value, continuing to innovate, to be a company that you want to work with, not just in the near term, but over the long term, because you see that we are going to be doing things to help you get more value, not just out of the data we're supplying, but out of the systems that you are building and using our data within. That's certainly our goal with DoorDash, and they push us every day to do that. And are very open about the system that they are building and using our data in, and kind of challenging us to make sure that we continue to bring that data innovation and content there. And that then turns around, and we have conversations that we share with our partners like Overture, so that we can work together to bring a better combined solution to market. Drew, anything you want to add to this point here?
No, I think it's a really good point, and I think this is I want to touch on the point you had about like not having lock-in, not having kind of winning your business because you have to, not because you want to. I think that's a big theme with Overture as well, which is like we don't want to have lock-in and kind of own your ID system. We want to be a common ID system that can function as an interchange. We want you to use us because it makes everything easier, rather than you have to use us because you got stuck with us. In fact, I just, we'll be adding a couple more features in the next releases that touch on this and facilitate the usage of GERS IDs, both for onboarding, but also for things like just checking, hey, I have an ID. What does it mean? Let me be able to call something to figure out what that is. And I think, we've observed this problem time and time again. Geospatial data is too hard, but everyone can benefit from it. Having common interchanges is going to be the key to empowering and unlocking the potential energy in all of these systems.
Yeah, and just to stay on the slide a little bit longer, do note that $65 million point. That is the revenue. It's really not revenue saved, but profit created in a 1% improvement of delivery rate for DoorDash. And that may be an extreme number. Most companies aren't going to see that many zeros associated with an incremental improvement, but that's where the ROI comes in, right? Like if we're able to deliver incremental improvements at a lower cost or lower time window, the business case for adding more content, adding more data, getting those deeper insights that Drew talked about earlier kind of makes itself. Now, just as a little sneak here, if you have questions, please put them into chat. Now is the time. I'm going to give you a few more seconds here by going to a bonus slide. And that bonus slide here is associated with the fact that we've been spending a lot of time talking about Overture precisely and data link, but at the beginning of all of this process is that orange box of your data. And specifically here, we're talking about your address data and being able to add information and context around that data that you have in your systems. By linking your data to an ID or series of IDs, you can enter into this framework in multiple entry points. If you're starting with a regrid ID, that can be your entry point. If you're starting with a DUNS number or an Overture Maps Foundation ID, that can get you into data link, the data link formed connections, and then you can traverse that set of linked information and pull in the information that we've been describing before. So with all of that, we will go back to the question slide, and Drew and I are happy to answer questions if you have them.
Yeah, we've actually had
any?
We've got a couple that have come through, and I'll also admit that I didn't know the bit about Overture and themes, so thank you for enlightening us all on that, Drew. That was really cool. So the first question here stems from, I think, some of the discussion you guys had around the APIs, and it's, how do you deliver or make the data you've pre-linked available? How would I access it? Is it only limited to certain environments? So maybe, Dan, we can start with you, and then Drew, if you want to chime in on that, how the data is delivered, accessed.
Yeah, so from, as Drew said, it's precisely that's actually building those link tables. And it is available through our data graph API, and that is accessible through the Precisely developer portal, but also natively within Snowflake. And we will be introducing the data graph API into other environments, sort of public cloud environments as well. In addition to being able to access the data through an API lookup, we also have just a flat file that has the ID maps mapping available, so that if you're looking to do that work or do work on premise in sort of bulk, and it just doesn't make sense to do it through an API, the data can be accessed that way as well.
Yeah. So kind of on that note as well, one of the things that we're going to be talking about that we released in our last release for Overture that we didn't publicize too heavily is a new data artifact called bridge files. So don't think of it as a service, but think of it as join tables. And they're join tables between the data, some of the data sources we use as input data sources to the elements in the map that they inform. So you, for example, if you're using OpenStreetMap data and you want to connect to our buildings, you can download this bridge file and then query that, and it's just a join table walk. That exists for the Meta business IDs, that exists for the Microsoft places that are tracked within Bing Maps. It exists for I think a couple other Esri buildings as well. We'll have a blog post on that up in a couple days.
Awesome. Another question here that I think is sort of top of mind for everybody these days, and it's, how do you see this linkage impacting AI initiatives? So I guess the question sort of, how do we see this sort of pushing this forward, or maybe changing some of the dynamics in play here as folks try to get AI spun up across their businesses and organizations?
I mean, look, the biggest, so when one of the things I observe most about enterprise AI adoption is that teams don't have the eval data they need. The most important asset you can have when you're building AI services or products or inside your asset is having eval data that allows you to continually test that you're making advancements. So hand labeled data, other data that either both allow you to train your model, train your prompts, and make sure you're moving quickly. And then as you get feedback from customers and people using the tool, you can collect error cases and your library of eval data grows. Having easily connected data interfaces allows for you to prepare richer eval data and add more information into your context. That's it. It comes down to basic data hygiene, coverage, and increased perspectives, which is true for anything, not just AI. And then there's a question that says, can I access GERS via Databricks? Yes. Cardo maintains a version of all of our data releases on the Databricks marketplace.
Yeah, and going back to what the AI topic, I think it's what Drew said there is worth underscoring, because and precisely we both are employing AI and then, actively engaged in a lot of conversations with our customers that are developing AI usage at different paces, and with different restrictions within their, or different guidelines within their organizations. And what is the most common thread in all of the applications that I've seen is um, data that is complete, current, and correct, right? Because if your data is out of date, it isn't complete, or it isn't correct, the AI models that you're using are going to give you definitive, inaccurate answers at a rate that may not be acceptable. So this ID mapping will allow you, not just at the beginning, but throughout the life cycle of your use of AI and AI models, to tune the data that you are bringing in. And just as I said, DoorDash is looking to build that concept of a golden record. It makes it easier to adjust that golden record and tune that golden record to be increasingly accurate, not to necessarily give you the answer you want to hear, but to give you the answer that is closest to the real world conditions. Right. And again, that's data preparation for the almost 30 years that I have been in this industry has been the most expensive component to building or using data sets. And just to add a little bit more there, at Precisely, we source hundreds of data sets to build our products. I wish our suppliers would do more of the work that we're talking about so that we could spend less time prepping and joining data and more time kind of innovating and building new products. But it is a lot of overhead just to build the products that we do from the various sources that we have coming in.
Yeah, I would say like that's when I say that data onboarding is a tax, like you end up paying that tax, and it's a tax that you end up paying with resources that you could be spending elsewhere. And
Yeah,
so
and it's a
like if
recurring tax.
yeah, exactly. And so like by adopting these technologies, like honestly, like I know like there's I know precisely with there's lots of ways we can talk about how data enables AI, and that's true, but not having to spend all your resources on data is perhaps the best on data integration is perhaps the best way you can support your AI efforts, because right now those are all almost spare time projects and integration, and if you can start to free up these things you can just experiment more.
Yeah, and no one source is perfect for certainly for every use case. And we know, as I was saying earlier, some of the biggest financial institutions see value in the Overture Places data that they are not getting from a bunch of the big name suppliers of business data. And that is going to remain the case. And what we're doing is kind of making it easier for you to build your product, your internal product, whether it's for use in AI or anything else. All right, we need to stop talking because I'm sure Ben's like, whoa, I knew you guys would get on a roll, but I didn't know I couldn't shut you up.
No,
So,
it's great. It's great. We've had two more quick hit questions kind of come in. One person asking, how do I get that flat file that Dan mentioned? I think this was back when we were talking about delivery methods.
sure.
And Dan, you can speak to that, but I think it's going to be a conversation with folks here at Precisely to dig in a little bit more. But
Yeah, it is a file that we license. The expectation is that if you're looking for that file that connects our Precisely data to Overture data, that you're licensing a Precisely product. In this case, this is not a file that we charge for, but we do expect that you've got some Precisely content. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for you. But we'll have a person follow up with you to get you that content.
And then the next question, what's the simplest way to get GERS IDs appended to a very large business file? Call Dan and use data link, because Precisely is going to have the ability to interpret your addresses in a way that Overture is not. So because as I'm sure everyone knows, addresses are a pain to join. There's lots of inconsistencies and incorrectness. And if you can leverage Precisely's addressing products to walk that walk into the business listings, that's going to be the easiest way to do that.
Great. And I think you sort of touched on this last question that we have here, which is someone I think mentioned earlier in the chat. We've been struggling with overlapping data from different vendors, creating deduplication work, entity resolution issues. Does this ID linkage solve these issues for me? And I think we've already got the answer, but if you guys want to reiterate on that a little
It
bit.
totally can. And that's I think one of the big things. And it's not just like, I think any ID system does that well, provided you have the toolings. If you're doing, I'll let Dan take it, because honestly, that's one of the best use cases for the Precisely ID product as well.
Yeah, and the cases where the entities won't be resolved is if they're unique to one of the data sets that you are inputting. But our goal, and this is true of the work we're doing with Overture, but also Dun & Bradstreet, is that we're creating an entity-to-entity ID to ID linkage, and we're achieving very high match rates there. So I think we need to get into more of the specifics to understand your data, but that is the intention. We are resolving entities against each other to say, these are the records that are referring to the same entity.
Great. Looks like that's all the questions we've got right now. So I think can go ahead and start signing off here. Thank you guys both for speaking throughout and having this discussion. Is there anything else that you want to say in the close just before we?
No, just to acknowledge, Gregory, I saw your message there. We'll be following up.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for attending the session today. We hope you had a great time. We hope you learned something. We hope you're excited and galvanized about using connected data and working with data that's linked from Overture to Precisely and onward. So if you want to learn more, we've got resources again below the console that you're looking at here. But also, please feel free to explore the website or get in touch for a longer, more detailed conversation about your priorities, your data, your use cases. Either reach out to us here or get in contact with the folks over at Overture. I'm sure they'd also love to have a similar conversation. And yeah, we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And thanks again for attending. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, don't hold back on telling your friends and family how cool linked IDs are.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.